Hello, and welcome to Birth Through the Veil. I'm Melissa Camrudin. Now, this episode feels significant for a couple reasons. Last week marked the 1-year anniversary of this podcast. What a journey! I love sharing these stories with you and having deep conversations with wise women and sharing in the telling of birth stories. What a dream! I may love it even more now than I did last year. And on this anniversary episode, Hardwicke Collings is joining me, a dream guest to be sure. I had an ambitious list of items I wanted to cover in this conversation, and I think we delivered it. In the past weeks since recording this conversation, I found myself telling people over and over to check in with this episode once I have it out, and it was over a huge variety of topics. Are you wondering about peri-menopause and matrescence? Listen here. Have some birth trauma to process? This is the one. Are you bringing up a daughter, thinking about how you will initiate her into womanhood? How about a son? This is the episode for you. Jane was such a delightful guest, and I cannot wait to connect further with her and many of you at Earth Daughters this June. If you haven't yet, there's no better time than this moment to get your ticket. Enjoy this conversation. Thanks for joining me. Yes.
Thank you.
I am very much looking forward to our conversation, as well as meeting you this summer at Earth Daughters.
Yes, what a special treat that's going to be.
It is. It's I went last year and it was so lovely. I brought my little 5-month-old baby, and it's just the perfect place to come pregnant or bring a baby, where it's all women just being themselves without any pretense, like you wear clothes or you don't. You things. I was like, oh, this is what we're like when there's no expectations. I didn't know. So it was so beautiful. It was like having a community of women who just want to hold your baby and love on your baby, and women are beautiful.
Yeah, and
really.
what a wonderful opportunity to be that.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. I'm introverted. I generally wouldn't think I'm not into big parties and raves, and I like people 1 or 2 at a time, or 3 or 4, and I like deep conversation, and I like all of that. So you would think maybe a festival wouldn't be I thought maybe it's not my thing, but I'm like, no, you find intimacy there. Women are really good at intimacy. So you find your people, and you can have those deep conversations.
Women behave differently when there's just women and their children and their babies. That without men present, it's a whole different situation. I was going to say ball game, but that felt very inappropriate.
Very yang.
But yeah, that's why I only have women come to my workshops, because when women and men are together, as I said, they behave differently, and women, this isn't to judge that. It's a natural, physiological, human, mammalian thing to do. So women, when they're just by themselves, with each other, then, as you said, a level of intimacy happens that wouldn't happen if there were men there.
It's true. And it's lovely. I love being around my husband and doing, however we all are with our partners, but it's we don't get very many opportunities just to be, especially over a period of a few days, with just women and small children. It's really wonderful. So I'm really looking forward to that again. That's sort of a highlight in my year that I'm like, oh, it's gonna be good.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay, well, I think I'd shared with you before, I sort of just to let it flow, but I have a few things that I thought we could talk about. And what I'd really love is to hear, if anything, I don't know if there's any things you like to talk about that people don't ask you. I don't know.
Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, let's start there.
So I recently went on a big teaching tour to the UK and Europe last year over the Northern Hemisphere summer, Southern Hemisphere winter. And I did so many workshops, I think it was 23 workshops in 7 cities and about 700 women sitting in circle. And there were 3 things that came out of that time as things that the women felt weren't talked about enough. And so the 3 things were, the first one was initiating boys into manhood.
Yes.
Yeah, which is huge and necessary, but it's not our job. It's a man's role to initiate a boy into manhood. And however, we need to help them. We need to help them figure out how to do it and to realize it's important and all that. So that was one of the things. And the other two things were about menopause. And one was menopause for women with young children, and the other was menopause for women with no children. So I've, since that tour, done quite a lot of social media posts about
Yeah.
women going through menopause with babies and young children. So I feel like that conversation has begun. And I'm gathering information about women who going through menopause with no children. And, you know, that's a whole extra dimension to the rite of passage of menopause in a patriarchal culture for women who have had no children, because there's all kinds of value judgments and expectations on women in a patriarchal culture that, as you say, don't actually get talked about. So that's something that's very important. Menopause for women with no children.
I find that interesting too, even the becoming a mother piece without birthing children. And I've noticed in my community here, there are a few women who don't have children who are in their 30s, headed into their 40s. And I can tell, like, being very respectful of not calling themselves mother, like in a mother archetype, for the respectful to the women who are currently parenting small children, and it's very overwhelming. But I can't imagine that you don't enter the mother archetype, even if you don't birth children, because I have like really good friends, like one of my best friends who doesn't have children, who's a mother to my children.
Mm,
She is like, she's not a maiden.
mm.
She's like just turned 40. Like, no, she's a mother. Like, I don't know. Do you have like,
I have a
that's
lot
just
to say about
another,
that. Yeah.
tell me.
Okay, so the way I see and teach the wisdom of the cycles includes our life seasons. So just like the earth has seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter, so do we. We have life seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And the spring season is our maiden season, and it goes from our birth until 25. And at 25, everybody moves into the mother summer creatrix season of their lives, regardless of whether they have children ever or never. So in the summer of our lives, the peak of our fertility, from 25 to menopause, we are mother, or we are and or creatrix. So during the summer season of our lives, we conceive, gestate, birth, and need to look after all manner of things besides humans. Could be careers, it could be businesses, projects, new versions of ourselves. And those births, metaphoric births, experience the same sort of impact from all the previous rites of passage as birthing a child does. Now, obviously, birthing a child, giving birth to a child is a huge experience. And I also want to add that every pregnancy results in a birth. Whatever finishes the pregnancy is a birth, whether that's a loss or an abortion, and needs to be included in our chronological teachings of our womb through our fertility. It's an important aspect to include all of the pregnancies as births. So there will be some women who don't have children but may have had pregnancies. And, you know, once you're pregnant, your body changes forever and doesn't return to any way that it was before. So I see maiden and mother, and I say mother / creatrix, right? Because, you know, like this is one of your babies, this podcast, for
Yes.
example. You know, women's careers are their, not so much babies, but they're the things that they dedicate their lives to, like mothers with children do. So, you know, it's like oxytocin, which I'm sorry, estrogen. Estrogen, the hormone that runs our fertility, also known as the hormone of accommodation and self-sacrifice, or the nurturing hormone, affects us whether we have babies or not. And we use that or express that nurturing, that the way we dedicate our lives, the self-sacrifice to whatever it is that we dedicate our lives to. And for many women, that could be their shop. It could be their career. It could be their business. You know, whatever it is, whilst we're fertile and under the influence of estrogen, we we nurture, we mother whatever we're doing, and that could be your friends' children, and what a wonderful support. But there's also a lot of things that happen for women who don't have children, because there's all kinds of reasons why they won't. There'll be a group who have tried their hardest and can't. There'll be a group who have missed out. It just the situation never arose where they found their partner. And there'll be women who have decided or chosen not to have children. So even within that group, there's a very varied reason for why they would be coming to menopause with no children. And obviously those are so different, and therefore those women would have completely different needs as well around that rite of passage, because the rite of passage of menopause is massive, and it is a time of feedback, and it brings up all the unhealed parts of us. So for women who have wanted to have children and haven't been able to, then there could be some extra inner work to do, some extra grief to experience or express, or regret or whatever, as opposed to those who actually chose not to do it. Then I don't know, because I don't have a personal experience around that, but I imagine there could be some relief in that group, that finally they're not fertile anymore and don't need to worry about that or whatever, So it's a big subject, and it deserves a lot of attention and needs to be given to it. And I'll work on that when I get some time. But there are plenty of other women, particularly on Instagram, who are in that boat, so to speak, who are doing a lot of work around it. So that's, as there are the other group that probably don't get a lot of attention or care or support, are those women who go into early menopause. And that can happen with or without children and have all its own effects as well. So that's something that I've noticed it hasn't been talked about much, but as I said, is being talked about a bit on Instagram now, the menopause for women with young children, which is so important because mostly women have got no idea about menopause. And with births happening later and later in our lives, just by the way that we're making choices, these generations are choosing to have babies later in their lives. Not that didn't happen before, but it's more of a choice now where women
and often a first baby.
Yes,
I don't think it's as common that you have your first baby later. Maybe you'd have your 10th baby.
Exactly.
Later.
Totally. Yeah. And it's very, very different having your first baby in your 40s as opposed to your 10th. Yes.
Yeah. What do you think? What advice do you have advice for women? So if you're entering motherhood for the first time later?
I do. I have lots. Let me just get my piece of paper here that says all of that. So basically, I think the most important thing is to educate yourself about perimenopause. Peri means around. So it's like what's happening before it's actually your last period. And the changes usually happen about 5 years before your last period, which you never know when that's going to be. But there is a rule of thumb that works mostly, give or take a year, that you add to the age you were at menarche. So average age of menarche is 13. So you add 40 years to that. And that gives you a year, or, give or take a year either side of when you could expect your menopause, which basically means your last period. So then the changes start on average about 5 years before that. So, let's say you had your period at 13, and let's say that at 53, that means you'll have your last period. Then from 48 on, the changes will begin. So the average age for menopause, though, is 50. So that means 5 years before that is 45. So if you're having a baby at 42, 43, then it's only going to be a couple of years before your body goes into the natural physiological shift into the changing of your hormone profile from being fertile to not being fertile. So education is the most important thing, and educating not just you, but your partner. So if you've got a partner and a young baby, then they need to know what's going to happen. A bit like how we should be helping our partners understand the menstrual cycle, they need to understand the perimenopause scenario as well. One of the things I've really learned as a journey woman through menopause myself, which was, I had my last period about 10 years ago, I realized that the commitment from a partner that's required for birth, like to be there and to help you and to support you in whatever way you need, helping, like not making anything wrong, being really open with like whatever you require, that is required in menopause as well. So we would hope that our partners learned how to support us through birth, because that similar sort of support is required through menopause. So they need to have an education as well if there's a partner. Now, the other thing I would say to women who will be or are navigating the beginnings of menopause and having young children is that just like we need the village for when we have little children, babies, you need the village when you go through menopause as well. So make sure that if you're having your baby later in your early 40s, that you do create your village for your care as a mother and maintain that connection. And hopefully there's other women in that little village of yours, hopefully it's not even little, in the village of yours that are having a similar experience to you, like having your baby in your 40s, so that you'll all be able to support each other and understand what's going on. So education is the most important thing. And then I think there's some strategies to do, because what happens as we get, so that 5 years before our last period, the first thing that happens is that progesterone declines. And progesterone is a mild sedative. So the first thing that happens is we are no longer mildly sedated. And as I love to say, which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek but very true, we may never have noticed that we were mildly sedated, but we do notice when we are no longer mildly sedated. So
does everyone else.
Yes, because we wake up, and the similar experience to that for us is week 3 of our menstrual cycle. So you can practice preparing for perimenopause by bringing a lot of consciousness to your experience in week 3 of your menstrual cycle, in the inner autumn of your menstrual cycle. So back to the menopause preparation, so I just need to remember what I was just talking about then, the changes, the village. Yes, so the progesterone goes down, so you're no longer mildly sedated, and then estrogen starts to decline. And decline is not a bad word. It's just the process that takes us to our new normal hormonal level, which will be actually very interestingly similar to pre-menarche. So our hormone profile post-menopause is very similar to the hormone profile we had pre-menarche, which is
That's
like
fascinating, because you already know her. You've met her.
You've
She's
met
back.
her. Yeah, and she's back, and she's so much more streetwise and resourced, and probably has an even deeper passion than she did when she was 12 or 11 or 13 or whatever. But the thing about other ways to prepare is to understand that the veil of estrogen, which came upon us at menarche, begins to rise. And so what that looks like or feels like or causes is that we are often less inclined, less interested, and confused about us not wanting to give so much to everybody else. Our orientation is directed to ourselves through this process, and that's often for the first time in our lives. So the trickiness or difficulty that women experience with young babies and their menopause journey begins is that they just feel like they want more time for themselves, and they feel like they don't have the energy or the inclination to give so much to their children as they feel like they should or were before. So the way to prepare for that is to know that's going to happen and not judge yourself about it, not feel guilty. It's what's going to happen. So to prepare for that, you can really invest in the baby years, the infant years, by doing things like all you can to create a secure attachment for your child. So that's one of the most important things. If you have a secure attachment with your child will be able to weather the changes further on, because they know they belong. They know that you love them. They know that they can talk to you and get attention from you whenever they need to. Other things to do are to basically create a stable home environment that's predictable. Like, so there's a routine, and there's, like, not, it doesn't have to be like strict, but just so the children know that this is what happens during a day. And so if you needed to take a break, someone else could step in and do that thing, whatever it is. And also to choose maybe one or two things in a day where you give your children your undivided attention, where you create a time of connection that actually creates oxytocin, which is the hormone of love and bonding. And so there's various things that humans do that create oxytocin. So you want to do this at least once or twice a day with your children. It could be, well, playing, but singing, dancing, eating together, being in nature together, like going for a walk to the park, for example, and picking up the things, and maybe having a little dance and a song in the car on the way. All these things generate oxytocin for everybody. So that makes the children feel good and loved, and also makes mum feel good and like she's being loving. So the other thing I recommend, and this is obviously from like birth on, is to breastfeed as long as possible. Because when you breastfeed, the hormones that you make when you're breastfeeding are really feel-good hormones, both for you and the baby. And so if you can't breastfeed or choose not to breastfeed, then, and you're bottle feeding, like, make it so you're as if breastfeeding. So undivided attention, skin to skin, not necessarily skin to skin, but in arms. And so I would definitely say, don't be on your phone when you're breastfeeding or bottle feeding, because that just teaches your child that you're not focusing on them. And if you don't focus on them, then they think all kinds of things, and they'll do whatever they need to do to get your attention. So just the obvious kind of bonding processes to suggest mothers do with their little babies in preparation for menopause, by establishing a really solid foundation of connection and love and bonding. So I think that's really, and also baby wearing is a really good way to ensure connection, but also makes your muscles stronger, which gives your bones the message that they need to be strong. So it helps with bone density, bone health, which is a big part of a consideration around menopause. And the other thing that will really help with connection and attachment is co-sleeping. So, I mean, I know not everybody can do that. Some babies wriggle so much nobody sleeps, but co-sleeping is another way to enhance the what's it called? The attachment. Yeah. So to enhance secure attachment. So that's really the recommendations that and also one more, to just make sure that you're not postnatally depleted. Now, there's all kinds of practitioners that can help monitor that kind of situation for you. And that can sometimes look like perimenopause, but it's actually postnatal depletion. So, don't assume that if you're starting to feel all different things or mood changes or exhaustion, that it may not be menopause. It could be postnatal depletion. So make sure you're like as well and eating well and resting when you can and all of that kind of thing.
Do you find any connections between maybe the feelings around, or like how you experience the early postpartum period and how you enter menopause?
Yeah, well, similar in that the postnatal phase of birth is still part of the birth, like we've heard of the term now, I hope everybody knows about matrescence, which is the name, a term coined by Dana Raphael in the 1970s to describe the process of becoming a mother. Like it's not necessarily an instant feeling. It's a process, and it takes as long as it takes. Like, think adolescence and the becoming an adult. So matrescence is the becoming a mother. And I've renamed menopause to be sagescence, the becoming a wise woman. So the feelings in the postnatal phase can be similar to other rites of passage, like menarche or menopause, where you're into it, but you're just not really completely sure that you know what to do, or, and that can vary in terms of feeling lost or confused or upset or depressed or anxious, like those feelings, which are feelings of, shall we say, like insecurity and just like not sure of what to do or why you feel the way you do. So that can be similar in the postnatal period to the beginning of the sagescence or menopause journey, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I think of it as even like the period of time where you're going, so you've had a baby, but your cycle hasn't returned. It feels a lot to me like that week 3 period, like things that weren't working before, are like really not working now. And I'm really aware of it. Like things
Mm,
need to
mm,
shift. And that sounds a little bit how perimenopause and menopause is described. Like
yes.
the veil is a little bit lifted and like I have less tolerance for
So,
things that are not.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So, just knowing that is so helpful,
Hmm.
because if we don't know it, we assume there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
And people say, "What's wrong with you? You're crazy." And we just agree with them. Yes, I'm crazy. And then, when in actual fact, at both that postnatal time and the perimenopause time, we're changing. We're changing from one version of ourselves to the next version. And that is not a bad thing. That's the design. That's what nature, that's how our bodies are organized to be able to do these transitions and transformations in the way that we do. And the other part to this is that one rite of passage informs the next. So we can pretty much predict our experience of menopause, perimenopause, by understanding what the setup is from our previous birth experience. Or if we haven't given birth, then it's what we've birthed, whether that's a career or whatever. Or if there've been no pregnancies and nothing like that, then it's the lead on from our menarche, because one rite of passage leads to the next and can give you the clues.
Yes. I found I've had my first baby at 22 and then my last baby at 38. So I've sort of parented on the either ends of it. And I can see gifts in both sides, right? Of being a parent when I'm 38. Like I think, yeah, it's hard to self-analyze objectively there. But that I'm a lot more patient and grounded,
Mm,
and
mm.
I have a lot more tolerance for nuance, and I no longer know all the things. And I think that's a gift to my children. I think my oldest one would agree. It's yeah, that it's a gift to them, and that's something that's come with maturity. And
Mm.
so it means I don't as much feel like yeah, I don't love running around at the park, but I find other ways, uh other things we can do that are awesome, and other ways we connect.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
the
love it.
trick.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be running around the park or,
Hmm.
real physical activities. Just make it be whatever you can.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you always can, like there's always things.
Mm.
So I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying having, I feel like I have the perception that time goes faster now because I know how
Mm.
short this time of little children
Yes.
is, and it
Yes.
makes it feel um like more acceptable and tolerable, like I'm not as lost in young motherhood because I know it's such a small phase of my
Yeah.
life. And so
Yeah.
even on when they say like the days are long and the years are short, and I'm much more aware of that now, and so can sit in the long days and be like it's one day. Like it's
Mm.
tomorrow's another one. And
Yeah.
so I'm enjoying that
That's wise
part of
mother.
maturing.
Wise
Yeah.
mother. Mm.
Yeah,
Because I want to
enjoying it.
add something there that will explain that a bit more, is as well as having these seasons in our lives, we also have seasons within the seasons.
Mhm.
So you're how old now?
39.
Okay, so let's imagine you're going to have menopause. Well, how old were you at your menarche?
14.
14. Okay, so let's say you'll have your last period when you're 54. So 14 to 54, that's 40 years. So there's 4 seasons within that. So each one's 10 years long.
Mhm.
So your spring of your summer was from 25 to 35. Then your summer of your summer is 35 to 45. So what did you say you are?
39.
Okay, so you're in the summer of your summer.
Yeah, it's
so
great. I love it.
yeah, it's the most intense.
Yeah, that feels true for me. Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your personal experience of perimenopause? Did you have awareness of it at that time that you were going through that?
Yeah, absolutely. I had the experience I did as a midwife giving birth, right? So as a midwife giving birth, I knew what all the things were. So,
Yes.
that's a contraction. So as a women's mystery teacher and a midwife in the largest sense of the word, because it's womb to tomb. So I knew all about menopause. So when I had my first hot flush, I was like, oh my God, there's a hot flush. So I was very aware of the process in the same way that I was aware of the labor of birth and all of that. And it's very similar. I think if we look at menopause, and when I say menopause, I mean either side of it, because menopause is the last period. If we look at it as a labor and a birth, it's much easier to understand, especially for those of us who understand what labor and birth and postnatal is and means and looks like and how it affects us. But as a midwife, I actually didn't think there could be anything more transformational than giving birth until I went through menopause.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I had a huge experience because part of menopause is that our experience of it is more like a readout of our state of stress, so our adrenal glands, the amount of stress we have, and also the load on our liver. And I'm a very busy and pretty stressed human being. And when I say stressed, I don't necessarily mean like stressed out. I mean like I have a lot of stress on my body from all kinds of things. So my experience of perimenopause was pretty intense. I had heaps and heaps of hot flushes for a long time. I still have them now. 40% of women over 60 continue to have hot flushes, just so everybody knows. And so I also had insomnia. That didn't last too long. But when I look back on it, the most interesting thing for me is that without realizing it, I actually started the School of Shamanic Womancraft, my international women's mystery school, right when I began my perimenopause. So that's interesting for me to look back on and see the beginning of the emergence of my mission, because that's a big part of what menopause is about. It's about shifting your focus on your fertility to your focus on what's your mission going to be. So interestingly, that's what happened for me without even realizing it. So my perimenopause was challenging, but that's what it's supposed to be. And it was a big teacher too, because the things that came up for me around my journey through the decrease of my estrogen, or the progesterone first, and the decrease of my estrogen were all the things that I'd been ignoring in my life and wishing would go away, So, for example, the state of my adrenals and the stress I was putting myself under, and what that looked like with my blood pressure and stuff. So my perimenopause experience really invited me, challenged me, forced me, made me face the things I'd been ignoring. And as I said, that's a really good thing.
Yes. It's like the questions, it will keep coming, right? You'll keep being asked to
Totally.
look.
And it doesn't stop post-menopause. Like, as I said, I'm 10 years on, and the same opportunities for refining myself and developing myself and personal growth and all of that continue. I don't think it's just something that happens around your last period. I think it's the invitation to be like that.
Yeah.
Self-aware.
How do you find your evolution as a mother through that? Like, I think mothering never ends, even as your children become adults. And what is it like? So parenting as your children become adults too.
Yeah, well, that's next level. I think the first shift is when they get their driver's license.
I just had one get a driver's license last month.
Oh, it's huge, right? You know, talk about having to, you learn to trust as a mother, and trusting with the drive that's huge. And I think like it doesn't suddenly change at menopause, because I think there's these changes as the children grow. So the teenage years, and then all of that. And then when they're less interested in you and you just become a taxi driver and a bank account. And I don't mean this in a mean way. I mean, it's great when the children are individuating. So the role of mother changes over the years. And then at menopause, I think that for me, what happened, excuse me, was I actually started traveling heaps more when I was in my perimenopause, and I was traveling overseas and teaching and going away and all of that. So everybody had to step up and, contribute around the house and do the chores and whatnot. And so that sort of naturally happened because I wasn't there all the time. But in terms of parenting, mothering adults, what has helped me the most is to remember their births and what I learned about myself in giving birth to each of them. And it's different, obviously, for each child. And so this is part of the things that I teach around the importance of paying attention to birth and what the birth teaches you. Because, we don't necessarily have the birth we desire. We don't necessarily have the birth, excuse me, we don't necessarily have the birth of our birth imprint, but what we definitely have is the birth we need to have to teach us what we need to learn about ourselves to take us to the next place on our journey in life. And so, the qualities that I learned about myself from each of the births of my children are the qualities that I need to bring to mothering them. So that's the case for everybody. But when they're adults, it's kind of more obvious, So for my firstborn, who I actually ended up giving birth by cesarean to, whatever the adverb is there. And so his birth taught me about surrender, because I didn't surrender. But I didn't know I didn't surrender. And I didn't know how to surrender, but I learned about surrender. So the quality of surrender is what I needed to bring to mothering him. But he's nearly 40 now. So surrender is so, so important in my mothering him as an adult, which is still a big thing, as you say. Like, it doesn't ever stop. But the quality has to change in that you can't be, I don't think you can be like doting on them, obviously. So in my experience with him, I need to surrender, which basically means, get out of the way and stop thinking I have any kind of control over his life, basically,
Yeah.
And it's good for me to remember what I was like with my mother when I was 40, and it's kind of similar. And then I learned about trust with my next birth, my daughter, and trust, because I had a vaginal birth after cesarean, and trust is the magic ingredient in our relationship. And my third birth and second vaginal birth after cesarean, I learned about presence and focus, and that's what I needed to bring to mothering him, and still now, as he's like in his early 30s, and I need to be fully present with him, or he'll call me on it, which is great for both of us.
Yeah.
So parenting adults is, I think, actually a privilege, and I notice that I feel very different in my relationship as a mother with my adult children to how I felt about my mother when I was an adult. So I feel like I've done some healing there to actually be a bit more, surrendered, trusting, and present.
Yes. I love that continues to teach. And it's interesting to think about, like, we sometimes think, well, there's like an ideal way to give birth, and it, in my community would be like undisturbed, physiologic, vaginal, nobody present but you and your partner. That would probably be like the, the prime birth. But then you think, okay, but what did you learn in your births? You had a C-section, and it was exactly the birth you needed to parent this child. So perhaps it could have been no other way. I mean, Who knows, right?
Well, it
can only be what it is.
Exactly. So. Yeah. And because I think that that's a big piece for us all to remember, that how we give birth is not random, and it's not something that we can write the recipe for. Like, we can make our choices and decisions about what we want to make, about the things we need to choose around and make decisions around, but how we give birth is like the culmination of our life thus far. It's like the readout of our mindset, our beliefs, attitudes, and fears. Now, women can bring that awareness in preparation for birth and do whatever you need to do to heal it. You know, like if I knew this when I was 26, giving birth to my firstborn, that I didn't know how to surrender, if I knew that, I would have been able to do a lot of preparation, a lot of inner work to prepare for the concept of surrender. But I didn't know that. So I knew it then for the next one. I knew that I needed to take surrender to my second birth, because if you don't take what you learn from one birth to the next one, you have to have a repeat experience to learn the same thing. So, the teaching is the gift. Births are teachers, and there will still be a teaching in a free birth with everything going really well, and it will be whatever it needs to be, because the other part is that the teaching from the birth may not come from the actual birth. The birth includes the conception, the pregnancy, the birth, and the postnatal period. And sometimes there can be a bigger teaching or challenge or whatever in one of those other parts other than the birth that is the biggest teaching. Like someone could have an easy conception, a beautiful pregnancy, an amazing birth, but then they feel lost or deserted postnatally, and that's the issue. So the teaching there is like, where's your support, for example, and about gathering support. So it's not just about how the baby comes out that holds the teaching, it's the whole story of that.
So what do you think? How do people process that? So if you've had a birth, which with any part of that, I mean, it's like, it's not ideal. You didn't feel support postpartum, like whatever it is, and then you're not going to have any more babies. You don't get to do it again. What are you supposed to do with that?
Well, you need to use it as the opportunity that it gives you to learn more about yourself. So first of all, you need to debrief the birth with somebody who knows how to do that, which is the most important thing to know. To debrief a birth is to know to be quiet. The best way for a woman to debrief her birth to start with is to just tell the story in an uninterrupted way by somebody who's listening with compassion and obviously no judgment and no comments. So the first thing is to tell the story. Now, if somebody doesn't have anybody to do that to, then they could do it by writing the story and not leaving anything out, and starting from the conception, or actually the prequels, because every birth it's not sort of random and standalone. So any previous pregnancy or every previous pregnancy will be playing out in the next birth in whatever way that happens. And the impact of how the other things that really impact our birth experiences are our experience of our menstrual cycle, which gives us our opinions of our body. Like mostly all of us have been victims to, or actually initiated into, menstrual shame. And so when we have menstrual shame, and you can't not have menstrual shame in a patriarchy, it's part of it. So menstrual shame leads to body shame, and body shame leads to low self-esteem and all manner of wounded behaviors, including self-harm, eating disorders, and risky and dangerous sexual decision-making. So if you've had menstrual pathology, or if you've ignored your menstrual cycle for all those years, that will play out in your birth, because the menstrual cycle is really kind of preparation for birth, so that you understand how your body talks to you about what you need. And like you're saying, you know in week 3 about what's going on there as the feedback, so that you can let go of it with your blood and all the things. So our menarche impacts how we give birth. She who is initiated into womanhood at menarche is the woman who shows up to give birth completely enculturated into how she's supposed to behave as a woman to be accepted by the culture. So debriefing a birth is also debriefing your life so far, as well as your red thread, your mother line, your
Yes.
female ancestral trauma. Now, we will all have inherited our female ancestral trauma from our mother line or our red thread, whether we wanted to or whether we even realize it. And our red thread trauma often plays out in our rites of passage. So menarche, childbirth, because we've been enculturated into how to expect what's going to happen for us, So there's lots to debriefing a birth by understanding everything that happened before it. So back to the debriefing. So listen, tell the story, listen, and then to actually figure out. It's good to debrief with somebody to actually get the truth of the situation, because so often women are told from their birth experiences that, this went wrong, or your body didn't do this, or we had to do and a lot of that, as you would know, is bullshit. So it's really helpful to debrief a birth with somebody who can see through the hazy stories that women get from their their carers, whether that's doctors or midwives. And I know some facilities offer debriefing, but often that's to just validate what they did. So you've got to be a bit clever with listening to what the stories are, and midwives or doulas who know all that stuff can if somebody says, well, they told me I had to have an induction at 40 weeks, then you can unravel that straight away and say how they lied to you, basically, and you had an experience happen that was going to probably definitely lead to intervention because it wasn't the right time. So I feel it's good for women to get the real story behind the way the practitioners acted and what that caused and didn't cause and all of that. And then there's a process where you actually think about, feel into what the birth represented for you, what it taught you. So like I said earlier about my first birth taught me about surrender because I didn't do it. So what we learn from a birth can be something we didn't do or didn't have, like surrender. A lot of women will learn about support because they didn't have enough, or the right support, like so often we hear the story of, it was just going to be me and my partner, and we did a preparation class and all was going to be great, but then he couldn't show up because of his story or whatever, or the way he was treated in the birth environment. So a lot of women realize, I need more support. I need a doula, or I need my own midwife, so they learn about the fact that they need support because they didn't have the right support or enough. Or the teaching can be whatever you needed to draw on from deep within yourself to be able to navigate the experience. So that could be trust. Like, it'll be whatever it is. Sometimes women have learned from their birth experiences that they needed to use their voice because they hadn't before, So figuring out what the birth taught you helps to put it in place, help it make sense in your life journey. And then to remember to be that woman, that one who does trust, or who does use her voice for that child, or who does surrender, or that kind of thing. So if you're not going to have any more babies, it's very important to heal the previous birth experience. And there's lots of people who are learning about birth trauma. Like it's a thing that people are beginning to specialize in. So there's lots of help around these days. And there's another very good reason to debrief and heal your previous birth experience in preparation for menopause, because one leads to the next. So you want to go into menopause having kind of come to as much peace as you can from your birth experiences by honoring them as the rites of passage you needed to have to teach you what you needed to learn, or could be to bring awareness to your red thread trauma, or whatever it is in preparation for menopause. And of course, women who are already beyond menopause often need to heal their birth experiences then, like women. There's so many stories of women going to the grave with birth trauma that's unresolved. So it's very necessary to be with it. And nobody diagnoses birth trauma. Women know when they've experienced birth trauma, and they're the ones who say they have or they haven't. And right now, 1 in 3 women experience birth trauma. So that's like a lot, and that's inexcusable.
Yes, I can see the benefit to even if you had like your dream birth to do a debriefing, just to integrate it and speak out loud what you learned from it, and what you want to bring forward into your life, into your mothering, into your next baby, into menarche. Like, I would think if I were having more babies, I think I would seek that out, just like an opportunity to speak my stories to someone. I've had the opportunity in a couple women's circles. I've had a couple really beautiful births, and I've been invited to share them. And just sitting in a circle of women where they just sit and they don't say anything, and I just take an
Mm.
hour and I tell my story, my birth story. I've learned so much from that about my own birth.
Exactly. I know. And as you
Mhm.
said, as you sort of create the space to do that, the stuff that comes out, like you say, is things you didn't even remember before,
Mhm.
or
It's
whatever.
different every time. I've told it a few
Yes.
times. In the telling, it changes, right? I remember
Yes.
other things. I think, oh, I didn't even talk about that part this time. You know? Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
And also,
beautiful.
it's really interesting if women are debriefing their births when the babies are little, to watch how the baby reacts when they tell the story.
Yeah,
And you
yeah,
can see, like, if the baby just starts crying or really squiggling heaps at a point, then, you know, maybe something happened then for them
yeah.
that needs to be looked at. And I don't know, there's so many ways to do all of that as well.
It's so interesting. I brought, so my baby just turned 1, and I just told her birth story a couple weeks ago, and I brought her with me to the circle. I just didn't have another option. And
Hmm.
she's pretty chill all the time, but she actually just like laid back on my chest, and she
Oh,
watched everybody and smiled at them the whole, like for like I must have talked for an hour. And
oh,
she just laid there and like listened to her own story. It
oh.
was, yeah, it was, everybody like melted us all.
I bet. And that's
Mhm,
so important what you just said. Like, one of the most important things for women who've had positive birth experiences is to tell the story to others.
mhm.
Because we live in a world now where, well, right here in New South Wales, Australia, where I live, less than 50% of women are pushing babies out of their vaginas now.
Yeah, it's like that here. It's
Yeah,
very
okay.
similar. Mhm.
So, like, most women get the impression that it's, well, I've heard the term unicorn birth. You know, if you have a
Yeah.
normal, natural, physiological birth, it's so rare. So, what we need to do is to change the narrative. So, those of you who've had positive birth experiences, it's actually your responsibility to share them and not to feel worried that you're going to shame anybody else. Like, it's not what's going to happen. Like, if that is what happens, that's somebody else's birth trauma showing up
Mhm.
that they need to deal with. So we need to tell positive birth stories. So those are the stories that are being told rather than the,
Yeah,
horrible.
you've got to know what's possible. Like
Exactly.
you've really like that's what's led me to like my births after my first one is hearing other people's stories and being like, oh, I didn't even know. Like I
Mm.
felt the trauma, but I was like, but you came out with a healthy baby. And no
Yeah.
one
What do
cut
you
you
want?
open. And
Yeah.
like, like you had this natural birth. But then in hearing more women's stories, I'm like, oh, this is something I could have. There's a whole I didn't even know that existed.
Yes,
Hmm.
exactly. So please, everybody listening, if you've had a positive birth story, tell it
Yeah.
as often as you can.
Yes. Yes. That's what we do on this podcast. Birth stories and
Yes.
wise women.
Beautiful.
Yes, I want to take a minute from a narc. I'm wondering if you can speak to that. I have two daughters headed that way. They're 10 and 12, so coming very
Ooh.
close. And I think
Mhm.
about it a lot,
Mm.
about how like what are some ways they can be initiated into womanhood
Mhm.
without the sort of drama a lot of us were.
Mm. Well, there's again, education is so important, so it's not a shock. I was part of a research team that did some qualitative research on women's menarches, and of there were 360 women that contributed to the survey, and 34% of them, so that's like a third, didn't know what it was when their blood came. They thought they were
Mhm.
dying.
Yeah.
Like, and there'll be women today who are part of that group. And like, that's a tragedy. And as a rite of passage into womanhood, that the first thing you think is that you're dying and there's something wrong with you, like that sets up your life. So the thing about menarche is that we have to understand how important it is. And it's so important because it's a rite of passage that is our initiation into womanhood and fertility. And whatever happens at a rite of passage or doesn't happen, who's there, what they say, what they don't say, who's not there, So all the situation and what's going on in their world at the time, that all adds up to teach the person going through the rite of passage. So let's talk about menarche. Everything that happens teaches them on a subliminal level, which means they don't even realize they're being taught. We're being enculturated, which is just a nice way of saying brainwashed, into how our culture values the next role we're going into. So that's woman, and therefore how to behave to be accepted by the culture. So I hope everybody's thinking what happened at their menarche. And, you know, the typical usual situation is that red thread trauma plays out, and mothers usually initiate their daughters into womanhood in the same way they were, unless they've woken up like you. I've got 2 girls coming up and I want to do this properly. I want to get this right. And then the mothers need to do their inner work so that they because remember, it's not what you say, it's what you do. So your children have already watched you for a decade or more with your menstrual cycle. So we need to normalize the menstrual cycle when they're little, especially for the boys, because the boys, like, you know, your children follow you to the toilet, right? There's no way you go to the toilet on your own when they're little. And so if you've got your period and you're changing a cup or a pad or a tampon or whatever, they're very interested in what's going on. So it's really important to tell them and normalize the process that, oh, mummy's got her period now, her moon time, her blood, whatever you call it. That's great. Not, oh no, that's great. We get to have a rest today. We'll watch a movie, or we'll sit on the couch and read some more books, or we'll go for a lovely slow walk. So you start to normalize the menstrual cycle for them, and that's obviously just the bleeding phase. And then, because they won't follow you to the toilet their whole lives, especially the boys. So you've got this little window to make it make sense. And then, so by the time, therefore, when the girls get to menarche, they know what you're doing. They've seen you. They've watched you. So that's what they'll know is to be the way. And then, so need to catch them up with all the information about the menstrual cycle. And I don't mean just the physiology. I mean the transformational opportunities, the magic, the special aspects of the menstrual cycle, so that they know that this is a good thing. It's not just something to endure or turn off or be frightened or embarrassed by. It's a great thing. So basically, you've got to help bust through menstrual shame, because that's prevalent everywhere. And so education, so that they know what to expect. So I think preparation for menstruation is a really important thing. And that's one of the focuses that I have around the education that I provide. And I train teachers to teach mothers and daughters about how to prepare for menstruation by teaching about the menstrual cycle, and the mothers preparing by doing their inner work and letting go of their menstrual shame so they're not passing it on. So education in preparation. So the girls are watching, you know, so it's good to start this like when their breast buds are starting to develop, or they're getting the odd pubic hair or underarm hair, or their bodies are changing shape, so that they understand what's going on. You know, there's lots of books around this. I've written one called Becoming a Woman, a guide for girls approaching menstruation. So I think it's really important for mothers and daughters to sit down and read this stuff together, and not to repeat what I've heard so many times, women your age and older, that their mothers just handed them a book, you know, rather than talk about it. So really engage with them and answer questions and ask questions and whatnot. And then some of the practices that I love is that the mothers prepare a special menarche box that they collect things. And, you know, it could be period undies, or a special blanket that you've crocheted that can be their bleeding blanket that they use, or reusable pads, all the things, you know, some crystals, some books, whatever, so that they get this present, and they know, you know, presents mean you're special, so that they feel special. And then to actually have a ceremony. And now here's where the village comes in, because back when you had your baby, my recommendation is to find your village and stick with that community. Find your community that you're going to do and celebrate your children's rites of passage through adolescence. So for girls, it's menarche, and for boys, it's puberty. Boys need to have a welcome to manhood ceremony around puberty. So you need to have your community because rites of passage are community experiences as well. Because, back in the day, that's how it was. The girls whose periods started that year were celebrated by the community. So have a party. And that's becoming more of a thing these days. But also, you can have all these great plans, but then you need to remember that your children, your girls, your young girls are also being exposed to the rest of the culture, either through their friends or if they're, watching things on social media, if they're already on that or whatever, but they won't be getting necessarily a positive menstrual cycle story from everywhere. So I think it's very important for us to realize that they may reject our positive menstrual cycle approach and think, ooh, yuck, and my friends haven't had that and whatnot. So there's a lot of kind of help you need to give them in understanding the culture, and also how women's attitudes to their menarche can come from previous trauma and all that. So not everybody thinks like us, but this is the way. And, we learn about nature and all of that. So I think you need to be prepared for being rejected as well, and not to take that personally, and not to make your daughter wrong for that. Just to be there like you always will be for every other part of her life, and just providing the information and helping her however you can. But she might not want to have a period party. She might not want to tell dad. She might want to keep it a secret. She may even keep it a secret from you. So just to be open to whatever might happen, but the education, the preparation is the most important part of it.
Yes, I love that. I've been thinking about that, a special box recently of things, and something I'm actually just starting at this age, just figuring out paper tracking. I've never tracked my cycle on paper. I went through the hormonal birth control, not hormonal birth control apps, like all these things. And I'm like, no, no, no. Like I really want to be in touch with it. I'm like, how cool would it be though to start with your first cycles? Being that connected to your body and actually then fully understanding how the cycle works, because I didn't understand that until I was old. I don't old 25. I don't way too far. I didn't actually know how it worked.
Yes. Imagine starting from the beginning. And I know plenty of girls who are women now who did that, and it's a huge difference. Their life is not sort of so, what's going on? They know what's going on, and you can actually start charting before. Because that's really amazing, because that sometimes it's you can tell that their moods are changing, but no blood comes or whatever. So you could, if you wanted to do that together, you could have them start charting the moon and how they feel at the dark moon, how they feel, and how they feel at the full moon. And then they'll get the connection and correlation between the dark moon and the new moon and bleeding, and the full moon with ovulation.
Oh, I love that's actually how I chart now, because my cycle I don't get my period for almost 2 years usually after a baby. So I still don't have a cycle back. So I just chart with the moon.
Perfect. So do that with them.
I thought of that. Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Because that also teaches them that the menstrual cycle is not some random medical event. It's connected to all the other cycles. Yeah. And the blueprint for the menstrual cycle is the lunar cycle. And that's the cycle we revert to post-menopause. We no longer have a menstrual cycle, but our cycle is the moon.
Yeah. Yep. I like that. Yeah. I can't remember, do you have a cycle journal?
Yes, it's called 13 Moons.
Okay.
Because that's how many moons there are in a year. Yeah, and it's a book, a spiral back book. I might be able to reach one here. Yeah, here we go. This one.
Yes. And those are available. Actually, can we order them in Canada?
You can order them in Canada and they get posted from Australia.
Okay.
But I'm coming over to Canada.
I know.
Yeah, and I will bring a bunch of books or post some. They're very heavy, so I'm not sure whether I'll be able to bring very many of those. But yeah, you can order them from anywhere in the world, and we post them from Australia. And I'm sure there's some local ones that are good too, if you can't afford the postage.
Yeah, we can probably find some. Sometimes I've been looking at some and they're not as preteen friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've just sort of been looking around to see if I can find one that's just really about understanding your cycle more than your
Yeah.
sexuality, or attaching like
Mm.
tracking your cycle to pregnancy.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
because
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to be about that, right? Like we
No,
don't just
exactly.
track to plan or prevent pregnancies. Like
Totally.
we
And
track to be inside our bodies.
that's it. And pregnancy is the least common thing that happens in a menstrual cycle,
Yeah,
you know?
that's right. Only
So,
like a couple times in a lifetime.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I've created an app too. It's actually the
Mm.
first holistic menstrual tracking app. It's called Spinning Wheels.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so that is basically that book I just showed you, plus the spinning wheels, which is also this. I've got a card version of it, and it's
Mm.
like understanding all the other cycles. So
Yes.
the menstrual cycle, the lunar cycle, your life season, and the earth season, and why you feel the way you do on any particular day. So the app has all of that information in it, and it helps you align with the lunar cycle and the earth season and how old you are and what that all means. And yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, I have to check that out.
Mm.
I like that. Let me see here. I just wanted to take a moment for, you had mentioned and the boys into manhood. And I know like as women, that's not our role. We can't initiate them. And as I was a single mom for a long time with a boy, it used to
Mm-hmm.
give me great anxiety about what I was going to do for him. And I'm still not sure that I've got it right, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
just interested to have you speak into that and then how we can support that as mothers.
Mm. Well, as I said, women can't initiate boys into manhood, but part of the kind of way that that rite of passage works is that the women, the mothers, hand their boys to the men. You know, like it's a ceremony. And
Mm.
different communities do different things to mark that. Like back in the day, that would have been a vision quest. Or now what I see in many communities is that the fathers and the uncles and the grandpas or whoever, there's all the men, gather, and the boys who are doing the rite of passage, like they do it as a group, and they could be all kinds of ages. Like when I was doing it with my local community, we would do it when the boys turned 13. So it was kind of like a, even if they hadn't fully developed, they were still 13, and that was, the age. And so basically, the process needs to involve a um, welcoming in by the men and a teaching, like we're teaching about the menstrual cycle. The men need to teach boys about life as a man and what that means and what the gifts are, what the responsibilities are, how you need to look after yourself, how you need to, your role in friendships and relationships and all of that. And also to create for them some sort of a process where they see what they're made of, like they test their metal. They like, so for example, the vision quest being the ultimate sort of example of it, but what it could be like, what we did here was the boys would go out on like a obstacle course treasure hunt sort of a situation that the men had already prepared in the woods, in the forest, in the bush, and they had the components of it. It's a bit like a quest, and they had to work together. So there were all these kind of things happening that were teaching them at the same time. So like the menstrual cycle teaches the girls, this was a process to teach the boys to work together. Like they didn't have to be better than each other. They needed to work together, and they needed to stretch themselves physically. So there would be like a tree climb to get to the next clue or whatever. And all the time, one of the dads was tracking them from behind so that they couldn't see them, and they had to be watching out for snakes and all these. They had to take charge and responsibility for themselves and make it through. And then they were greeted at the end of the course, the walk, whatever it was, by the men, welcoming them into the circle of men. And then the men had a talking circle where they described, this is in their words, they described to the boys times in their lives when they were not bulletproof. In other words, expressing that men are vulnerable too, and that it's okay to cry or feel sad or whatever, so not to get this modern day perspective of man, what a, superhero, but like, a normal person. Now, the thing about boys, if they don't have something like this, they will create something like this. And what that usually looks like is risky behavior. So it could be, depending on what age, what kind of access they had to things, but often they'd be doing it a bit later, like they might get really drunk or score girls, how many girls they can, do whatever they do with, or if they've got a license, just driving fast and dangerously. Like a lot of things happen around this kind of recreation of a rite of passage for boys that's very dangerous. So it's really important to do something. And here in Australia, there are some groups who offer it to people as a, a course, a process that dads can do with their sons, or uncles if there's not a dad or whatever. So I imagine there's similar things in other countries too. And if there isn't, then that means the community needs to create it. And it's not hard, and it's actually our responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. You mentioned true midwifery, or like full spectrum midwifery, being womb to tomb. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts on like our last rite of passage, on death as our last rite of passage.
Yeah. Well, plenty of traditional cultures and Eastern philosophies see life as preparation for death. Like it's the ultimate final rite of passage. And, it's something that's feared in our culture, like big time, and even avoided. Like we're living in a culture now that's all about longevity and living forever, to never die. And, that's so unrealistic to my mind.
The most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also not the way of life or nature, like there's also in our life, in our culture, this kind of stay in the summer forever, keep going and growing. Like nothing in nature that's healthy keeps growing. So death is part of life, and that's preparation for death is the acceptance of that. And, we could feel sad, we could feel grief, whatever it is. But in my research around death, the experience people have at death in terms of the pain and the fear and all of that is kind of related to how much inner work and meditation they've done before death. So the more prepared, the way to prepare for death is to practice inner work and meditation so that you can meditate through the process of dying. So it becomes like a cyclical thing where you're inward and then you're out for whatever. And it seems from the studies that I've read that the people who are more practiced at that cyclical meditative process have an easier experience. And they monitored it around pain, and they had less pain through the process of dying. And the other thing I would say about death is that it's the same portal as birth. People who've been to a birth and also been to a death, been present at a death, when someone takes their final breath or however that works, they see the similar, or feel probably the similar energy. And so the way we want to be at birth, supporting, quiet, gentle, is the same way we need to be at death. And to honor in the same way we would honor a woman's desires around birth and what she does want, doesn't want, whatever, same for death. So I think there's a lot to be said for preparing for death as well. And I'm I'm 66 now, and a lot of people my age and older are starting to get sick, that I know, and people have died. So I'm seeing that from this midlife on, or 60s on, or whatever, that it's a good idea to start thinking about preparing for death, and particularly in what kind of mess you're going to leave for everybody else.
Mm.
I remember when my mother died, she died after my father died, and my daughter helped me to clean up, 70 years of life and all the things that were gathered and whatnot. And my daughter said to me, "Don't you leave me a mess like this."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, that's also a respectful thing to do, to tidy up your life so that you don't leave a big mess for everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
because, you will be gone and what will be left is your mess. And not only your mess, but, just on
Yeah.
a practical level, I think that that's a really important thing to consider for your children or whoever it is that's going to be dealing with the aftermath of one. So death, rather than be feared, needs to be respected.
Yes. I can see when I look at it, what has happened to birth, and we're becoming more aware of what has happened to birth, has also happened to death, where death has become an institutionalized thing that we want to medicate away and not experience. And there's something's being robbed there.
Yes, totally.
And there's an opportunity to like bring death back to our homes and
Yes,
within our families. And
totally. Yeah.
Mhm.
And how beautiful that would be, and how, like, it's going to be sad. There'll be grief and regret and all the mourning and whatnot. But in your own environment,
Mhm.
it's easier.
I think there will be anyway. It's just like with birth. Like you can go to the hospital and you can do whatever. You can get the epidural, but you're still gonna go through the thing. You're still gonna experience. It's gonna be like really raw and like take you down to the bottom of yourself, and like no matter where you go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where do you want to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Where do you want to unravel?
Yeah, yeah. And what support
Mm-hmm.
do you want, and all of that kind of thing. Yeah, it's very. Both my parents died at home, and
Mm-hmm.
that was their desire. They didn't want to go to hospital and be in a bed just falling apart or whatever. So that was great to be able to help them have that. And yeah, so it's such an important thing to think about. And
Yeah.
there's so much about euthanasia when putting people out of their misery or whatever. But the way what you just said then about how death is medicated, it's already happening.
Mm-hmm.
So many people are on morphine drips
Yeah.
in the process, and so many people have their last breaths as the morphine gets turned up.
Mm-hmm.
So whether they realize that's what's going on or not, it is.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yes.
All our rites of passage are medicated.
It's interesting, right? There must be
Yeah,
something there.
yeah, exactly. It's a pattern that
Mm-hmm.
we need to pay attention to.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so you're coming to Canada for a tour. I mean, Earth Daughters, as we know. And I
Hmm.
wonder if you want to just talk about that a little bit, like where you're coming in Canada, what you're offering, and then like what are you bringing at Earth Daughters?
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I'll be in Mexico in May, and I'll be giving my 3 one-day workshops in Tulum and in the jungle out of Mexico City. And the workshops are Moon Song, which is about the wisdom of the cycles, reclaiming feminine knowledge, wisdom, and power, the spiritual practice of menstruation, and healing our menarche. And then the next one's the shamanic dimensions of pregnancy, which is about our birth imprint and birthing, whether that's babies or whatever else we're birthing, and understanding the importance of that and letting go of fears around birth and drum journey to meet the baby or your goddess. And then the third one is Autumn Woman Harvest Queen, which is about harnessing the transformational powers of menopause and demedicalizing it, and seeing it for what it is and how to flow with it. So those 3 workshops I'm doing also in Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver.
How
And
long are those?
the first one is a bit longer. It goes from 8:45 to 6 p.m.
Like one day?
One day, yeah, and the other 2 are 8:45 to 5 p.m. It's
Okay.
really good to do all 3 of them because they like build on each other. And
Yeah.
if you book the 3, you get a free copy of my book 10 Moons, which is my book about birth, and also my book Blood Rites, which is the spiritual practice of menstruation. So if you book 3 workshops, you get a copy of each of those. And the other thing I'm doing is 2 8-day retreats, which are deep immersions into shamanic womancraft, where the women make a frame drum and go very deep into each season of our lives and our rites of passage. And that's happening in Salulita on the east coast of Mexico City in May, and I'm doing one in Golden in BC, across the mountain from where Earth Daughters is, the weekend after Earth Daughters.
Okay.
And so anybody who's part of Earth Daughters gets a 10% discount to any of that. And there's a code that will have been distributed amongst the community already. And then Earth Daughters on the solstice, very exciting. I'm going to be doing lots of things. I'm going to be doing the opening and closing ceremony. Like there'll be others participating in that, like everybody, but I'll do those ceremonies. And then I'm doing 3 actual workshops. One of them is a menarche ceremony for the daughters who are there. And another one is going to be called Be the Woman the Earth Needs Now. So that's going to be about dismantling our internalized patriarchy. And then the other one is called Autumn Woman Harvest Queen. So that's about menopause. And they're each like an hour. I think the first one's an hour and a half. So I'll be doing those. And also be part of the evening ceremonies as well. So that's very exciting.
That is so exciting. Would you say, so the menarche ceremony, it's an initiation ceremony, so it's just for like young girls who already have entered?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what I believe, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
and because there's teenagers or young women, girls coming to the festival.
Yes, it's a little different this year. There wasn't an offering like that last year, and now there's like a whole, like sort of like a little mini festival going on for young girls.
Beautiful.
So,
I presume that that's the focus for them is there. Yeah. And I recently also did another presentation on the Earth Daughters community things, and I did a session there called The Spiritual Practice of Motherhood. So that's because I'm not doing anything about motherhood at the festival, so I thought I'd offer that as well into the other community thing.
Yeah, so if you join their collective, then I imagine they have
that's
a recording
the collective
of that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
that you could check out. Yes. Okay, well, I'm really looking forward to all these things and to meeting you in person. Thank you so much for talking to me and sharing all of your wisdom. Did you have anything else we didn't cover? Anything else you wanted to add?
Nothing's coming to my mind right now other than that just how important it is that we're all doing this, like we need to co-create a positive menstrual cycle culture because we currently live in a negative menstrual cycle culture. We need to create a positive birth culture and a positive menopause culture. It's actually the work of our times. So there'll be some of the older women like me doing it, but it's your generation that really needs to be living this.
Yeah, there's an awakening to it. Like so many of us are feeling the pull to that. So, I mean, it's bigger than us, right? Like
totally.
It wasn't sourced from inside of me.
No, it's what we're remembering and then reclaiming.
Yes, bringing it back. Yeah. Yes, I had. Did I hear you say at some point that you're not touring anymore after this?
That's it. Yeah. This is my last big tour overseas. It's such I'm away for 3.5 months and lots of travel and whatnot. And you're in the summer of your summer. I'm in the winter of my autumn. So in the winter of my autumn, so at the end of autumn, the harvest is pumpkins. So I'm seeing this as my last big pumpkin.
Yes. What comes after the pumpkin?
Winter.
And how would you embody that?
So the way we embody winter is as the crone. So it's when we become the wisdom keeper, the storyteller, the story keeper, and it's when we become the essence of ourselves, like everything's stripped away and fully focused on whatever it is that we are or do. So a bit like what winter's like in the earth. It's like crystalline. It's slower. It's about more rest and recuperation and all of those kinds of things. So the winter I'm looking forward to is doing more writing and teaching, and I will travel. You know, if people invite me to festivals, I'll go to that. But I'm just not going to go and do these gigantic 3-month teaching tours.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's a long time to be away from home.
It is. I miss my garden and my children and my grandchildren.
Yes, I imagine. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Melissa. I'll see you at Earth Daughters Festival.
Yes. Thanks for listening. You can head to Instagram and birth.throughtheveil to see birth pictures or just pictures from each episode. The show notes have links and more ways to connect, along with the link to submit your birth story. I would love to hear it. New episodes of Through the Veil come out every other Tuesday. You can follow, subscribe, share, rate, and review this podcast to be in support. Until next time.